think the whole on-demand thing just kind of ended, right? And then how did you not end up staying there? What happened at the end there?
It's a good question. It's a real good question. And that, really pissed off a lot of people, and a lot of people are really still scratching their heads.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Here's the Pitch, sponsored by Masses Restaurants. There's 5 locations in St. Louis. STLmasses.com is their website. Doug Goodstein, he was the producer, executive producer of In Demand, Howard TV, but you were a producer at E for a while. Doug, thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to be honest, this is very exciting for me because we're going to have a little TV talk, the TV producer to TV producer talk. We're going to be nerds together.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me.
I read you were with ABC News. You were kind of a runner, and Scott DePace sort of, I don't know how you knew Scott, but maybe set this up.
It's an interesting story. I was at ABC News. I was called a desk assistant, and I was doing field reporting. It's called an off-air reporter. So I was like 22, 23, 24 years old, and I was working at the top, cream of the crop. That was at the top of the food chain on news at World News Tonight, World News This Morning, World News Now, with Peter Jennings in the newsroom and all these top of their class anchors and reporters at the most incredible news organization. As a young kid, I was like, wow. But pretty quickly after 2 years, I realized it was a little too intense for me and too serious. I was more into the entertainment aspect, and it was really hardcore. Not that I didn't like it. I just wanted something else a little more in the entertainment field. So back then, I literally just sent an email. I'm sorry, there wasn't even an email. I literally just sent a resume in the mail all over New York City to different organizations and like MTV and I think Entertainment Tonight and the right places. And there was a company called E Entertainment Television that I didn't really know much about. They were just starting up, and I get a call back on the phone, not an email back because there was no email, from a guy named Scott Einziger. And Scott and I, coincidentally, about 2 days after I graduated college, I worked freelance for a film production company that, long story short, Scott Einziger also worked for that same film director. So he was just going, oh my God, we compared stories from this crazy director and we hit it off. We got along, and he said, I have something evolving. And we met. And then, sure enough, what was evolving was the Stern Show on E. And the rest is history. He hired me. I was associate producer. I worked my way up the food chain and lasted there for 19 years.
Yeah. So when you get this call, what did you think you'd be doing? And then what did you end up? I know they did a lot of outside shoots. You did a lot of stuff with Hank the Angry Dwarf, which I want to ask you about. But what was it sort of billed as to you, and then kind of what did it turn into before you became the executive producer later on?
Yeah, well, when I started, when I started at the E Show, it was just myself, Mike Ganji, Robin Radzinski, and Scott Einziger, and then, of course, a few people on the tech crew, which is Scott DePace and guy we called Gump and an engineer, and that was it. It was like 7 or 8 of us, and so it was really doing everything and anything. Everything. I mean, Ganji and I would run out and we'd get props. We'd do shoots. We'd help produce studio segments. We'd help with bits, anything and everything. The rights and clearances, producing shows, everything. It was just so few of us. We did it all. It was such a great learning experience and such a great place to evolve.
Yeah, so, a lot of it on E was just showing 20 minutes of the show. I remember they kind of tried to turn these things around maybe 2 days later, 3 days later, and after a while, it was like, let's just save the best stuff, make it good. But just tell me a little bit about trying to whittle down, how Howard is. He does like a 2-hour thing on something that is hilarious, and you try to make it 20 minutes.
Yeah, it was tricky. It was very tricky because, again, when we were editing that show way back then, it was on tape. So we would have to go into the edit bays tape to tape and create the shows. It wasn't this digital world where you just put it into a computer and you just, you tweak and you trim. It was like we were cutting in edit bays with tape. So it was very challenging to get to that 22 minutes and 30 seconds, I think was the timing of the E! Show. It had to be exact, obviously, with very specific commercial breaks. It was tricky. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, Howard's interviews at that point, early on in the E! Show days, they were sort of formulaic, where they were for the most part, like 30 to 40 minutes. I know now he evolved into doing much longer interviews. But then it was pretty much like, we usually had source material that was about 30 or 40 minutes. So yeah, it always sucked. You never really want to edit out stuff in an interview. You want to sort of let it go. But the format didn't present itself. So we had to trim out a decent amount of stuff. And if it was really good and it was 44 minutes, let's say, we would go into 2 parts.
So when do you realize, as you're doing this job, that, I'm going to be part of this show? He's going to yell at me. He's going to come at me. He's going to come at the pace. I remember, you mentioned Gump. I remember Gump being on one of the E! shows. That's what's so funny is I just remember back. So when did you realize, he's going after Baba Booey. Now he's going after Jackie. What did I do? Now Ganji's getting it. I'm coming next. When did you realize that being part of the TV crew was going to be, I'm going to be part of the show now?
Yeah, I was, I guess, a little naive at the very beginning because it's like, I'm behind the scenes guy. He's not going to care about me. But I don't know how long it was. It was probably a few weeks before I made it onto the air, and I was like, oh boy, game on. But yeah, I mean, I was not expecting to be on, but as you become more associated with the show and friendly with everyone on the show and just a part of the family or the team there, just everything. You couldn't do anything. I mean, you could walk in the hall and just, scratch your nose, and next thing you know, you're on the air because Doug was picking his nose in the hallway, and then you defend it, and then it just escalates. The more you defend yourself or the more you sort of fight back, it just became, you just exacerbate the inevitable, which is, it just always evolved into something that is something as innocent as just, scratching your cheek could become fodder.
I watched as I prepared, as I do for these. I watched this clip where I guess E! did a documentary on how they put the show together, and Howard obviously played it on the air, and it's Scott, Einziger, and DePace, and Ganji, and then Grillo even gets interviewed. And I mean, everything they say, Howard stops the tape and he goes, "Is this what it sounds like?" And he made a bit out of this documentary, And I had to think, man, what would I say if I was Scott Einziger trying not to have Howard? There's no winning. I mean, he's like, oh, you guys just shoot me. But it became this bit. He always figured out a way to make a bit out of everybody. I think that's why the show's great too. Especially back then, anybody that came in contact was in the line of fire. I guess it had to be hard to do your job when you're like, all right, I want to do this right, but I don't want to be called into the principal's office at 7 a.m.
Yeah, I mean, you just knew. It didn't take long to figure out that as soon as you, anything and everything you did was potentially going to be dissected and become a bit or put you into the crosshairs. So sort of expected. I forgot about that documentary or that behind the scenes. That was funny. I think that was Einziger generation, right? So
yeah.
Scott was in the Yeah, I do remember that now. That was funny.
Yeah, I was like just kind of...
You can't win. That's a scenario. You just can't. How could you win that? You're talking about how hard work and everything you're doing, and he's just gonna, he's just gonna play up on that and be like, oh yeah, that's grounds for getting ridiculed.
There's a scene in the documentary where Gary is standing talking with Einziger and DePace. You might have been in there too, and Ganji, and they're all huddled around Howard's. This is at the new studio. And Gary's like, so we're going to have 3 people, and Gary's trying to produce, and Howard's just kind of nodding, and you could tell this was set up for the show. It just was so hilarious because they're trying to make some sort of 22-minute, here's a behind-the-scenes thing on the guy that does the show who doesn't really want the documentary done on him. That's why, again, it's funny to me. You got, so as a producer, because I'll get into the executive producer area, because when I read about that, just seeing what you did there was amazing, but I know that you got to become friendly, become basically Hank the Angry Drunk's handler, Hank the Angry Dwarf. Hank the Angry Drunken Dwarf.
Yes.
And you're like became his handler, right? So how does he come to the show? Because then it becomes he's like a major character on the show, and you're kind of taking him around for different bits, and just tell me a little bit about because we love Hank.
Yeah. Well, the way that evolved is that, remember, he won, or Howard set up the Sexiest Man Alive contest from People magazine. So Hank was a character on the show at that point, I think for maybe a year or not even. And it just blew up, and he became the sexiest man alive, beating out Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio. And Hank, I knew Hank. I wasn't like buddies with him. We never really spoke off the air, but he came to me a few times. He's like, "Hey, I got a call for a bit." I guess he just felt like he could go to me as a resource, and he just started asking me questions. And I said, "Well, I don't think you're going to get into a contract negotiation for a guy that wants to book you." So I said, "Let me make the phone call for you. I'll do it as a favor." And that's how it started. I remember I did the first one as a favor for him, and I got him booked. And then I lined him up with some people or someone to chaperone him. And then all of a sudden, when he won that contest, his phone didn't stop ringing. And then, of course, with Hank, he didn't know what the hell to do. He didn't really have anyone. And he was comfortable with what I did the first time. And he just said, "Could you answer this call? Could you help me out? Could you help me?" I said, "Whoa, there's actually something here with this magnitude of interest and booking." So I said, "Let me just, you want me to do these for you?" So it was a little weird, getting involved with someone from the show in a different capacity. But it was fun. I took care of him. He made a lot of money. He had fun. He had a lot of fun. And, I would set him up with chaperones. I didn't really travel with him too much. Sometimes I did, and it was always an adventure. And, that's how that evolved. It was as simple as just him not knowing what the heck to do. And then I spoke to his mom, and I discussed, "What do you want to do here?" She didn't want to stop booking him. So I took it over.
You have any favorite memories that come back when you think about some of these travels or some of these things that Hank was doing? Because all I can think of is some of the things he did on the show, but you had some behind the scenes.
Yeah, it was fun. He was just such a good guy. He had obviously the persona that people knew on the air, and he played that up. But he was just he actually was a quiet, really nice, smart guy. He was just this awesome dude. But when he drank the booze, it was a whole different story, and he just became the character. But off the air, he was very different. He was really nice. He was really caring. He was really sincere. He really was a nice person.
Yeah.
People were surprised when I told him that. I'm like, "Oh my God, he wasn't always angry and belligerent the whole time." I'm like, "Not really. No, not really. He was actually pretty calm."
It's fun as you're telling these stories about him. I'm thinking about him, and it just makes me laugh because the one that always stands out to me was when he had the rock and roll trivia with Gary, and he's literally taken the bottle. Howard asked a question, "Buffalo Springfield," and he's just nailing these answers, and Gary's like, "I can't beat him." I mean, he's a savant, and it was like you find this little thing, this trait that he has. But yeah, he was amazing. He's like the first, I think, Whack Packer that really I understood like how funny the Whack Pack was. Like High Pitch Eric, I understood, but this guy was like just so different. And of course, he was a dwarf. He had all these things about him that were great, and that's what
funny. He was really fun. Not only smart and incredible with the trivia, he was funny, smart, and in the crazy state that he was in so many times, he had still had his wits about him, and still was able to answer questions when he was like completely annihilated. So I was like, "There's no way he can answer trivia when he's this drunk," and then boom, like that, split second, he would get the answer.
I loved it. How much like control does Howard have over this TV show? I mean, he's doing this radio show 5 hours a day. Does he always come into the editing room? I mean, does he see the last edit? Can he be that involved with everything that's going on? And I'm kind of getting into the in-demand days too, because now you're putting out content hours at a time. I mean, he can't see everything. So how does he kind of control what's going out?
With the E! Show and with Howard TV, there became certain autonomy after he felt comfortable. And with the E! Show, it was pretty quickly. I mean, there was very, very few times I could recall where we had to like run the show by him. It was pretty much if there was anything to question or there was concern about anything, it would just be a quick conversation after the show or an email or a call that Robin or Scott at that time would make and say, hey, do you want this in? Do you want this out? But it was very few and far between. And with Howard TV at that point, the comfort level was so great. It was really almost fully autonomous. If we obviously wanted to create a new show or a new series or a new one-off special, I would run everything by him and get his approval before we did anything and went into production. There was a lot of autonomy, especially with the in-demand shows. It just, if there was anything, really special and new or fresh or questionable, we would obviously edit that out. But for the most part, it was autonomy with that TV crew. And if there was anything that really was extreme or, really uncertain, few and far between when we would run stuff by Howard directly to get an approval or an answer.
So tell me a little bit about the from E to On Demand to the Howard TV is what On Demand was. There was a time where you guys weren't working, right? And how did you become the executive producer? Give me just that story, because it was right in between the time, I guess he went from terrestrial to satellite too at the same time.
Yeah, the transition was, I think it was like 2 weeks there was the gap for 2 weeks and that was it. It went from E and transitioned right over to In Demand. So that was pretty wild because obviously the show was no longer in production on E, and then the whole formula changed where it was a subscription video on demand service. So it started out with me and Ganji, where we went into that library and started categorizing how we're going to have these categories on the menu on the on demand. So we took whether it was celebrities and sports and remote shoots and wild and whack pack, and we just started breaking down into categories, and then we created and repurposed all the content. So we spent the first 4 months just re-editing shows, and they were uncensored, and we repackaged them with new graphics and a whole different format, no commercials, and we just, where something was maybe a 40-minute interview, but for the E! Show, we cut it to 22, or whatever whatever the length was that had to be cut down. Now we had the ability to just go back to that raw footage, uncensored, and let it go in its native, basically as it happened, almost like it was live to tape.
So that and all the raw stuff. I mean, I think the E thing starts in '94. Someone in their mind says, "Well, we'll just keep it all," right? I mean, that, which is the smartest thing ever. Don't just do the show.
He owns all that stuff. That's all part of the line. That was part of the deal. They retained ownership of those shows, which is very smart to do. Most people can't really do that these days. You don't really own your show. But he owns all that stuff. So that stuff obviously is, I assume, still in the library and still being used. I have no idea how far back they're going with stuff. But that was pretty a new formula.
And you had to watch it all, you and Ganji, just sitting in a dark room with some wine and some cigars?
Well, no, at that point, then we started building up a team. So we had producers, we had editors, and then, so we would go into the notes, we'd look if there was any legal restrictions, anything to be concerned about. Before it went on the air and they were recut, we watched everything. We watched every single show. And I think we launched In Demand with like 50 hours or 50 different episodes before we even started it serious.
Yeah, my cable company didn't have it. I was so pissed. I had to find some fans to send me some of the, I have to see this. I have to just, and there was fans out there just, that's what's crazy. And that's before YouTube. So this is the only way you could see it, is if you didn't have On Demand, you had to find a fan that would send it to you. And I had this guy up in Alton, Illinois. It was awesome that he didn't have to pay for it. He put it on DVDs. I still have them. It was cool. What's it like for you when now you've had a few pretty good arguments with Shuli and Ralph on the air, and then you have to go back and watch it and know that, all right, that's going to have to make it, and that's going to live in perpetuity, and I see it on YouTube now. Does that stuff kind of come to your head when you're like, oh shit, what did I just do?
Yeah, I mean, it just comes down to it was a very real environment. So when you're on the air or it is a show, a lot of people, what made that show so interesting and unique is that it was people were real raw, and it was real emotions, and it was real fights, and it was real arguments, and it was just, you almost forgot sometimes. A lot of people would come off the air and be like, oh my God, like, what the hell just happened here? You feel like you're having an argument with someone face to face, and you're not realizing it's on the air. So you're like, oh shoot, yeah, sure. There's certainly moments where you're like, oh man, what the hell?
Well, that's part of it though, right? Because Howard breaks it down and makes you feel like you're just in a room with guys, and it's like, right? I mean, it feels like that's what happens with that show.
Absolutely, yeah. And even with the guests, that's always been the thing. It's just you sit down on that couch, and it's just like you just feel like you're having a conversation, not an interview, not live, not on the air for people to be listening to. Just very comfort. That was the best skill he has, is just making people feel comfortable and almost forgetting where they are, that they're actually not just having a conversation without microphones and being broadcast.
I'm going to ask you a few names, just a few words on each guy. Artie Lang, tell me a little bit about him, working with him, and then do you get to keep in touch with him? I don't think anybody is, but any updates on Artie and what it was like to work? He was so funny to me. I mean, when he came, I always talk about this, like the two eras of the show. I love the Jackie era and I love the Artie era, but Artie to me was so fast and so funny. And I know Jackie was different; he was a joke writer. Artie when he was just popping in with things, it was so funny to me. Just give me a thought on Artie, and I don't know if you talked to him. I guess not.
No, I don't even know where Artie is right now, and I know a lot of people don't know. He's sort of just disappeared. I hope he's okay. I haven't talked to him in probably a year and a half now. So that's a real worry and concern. I just hope he's all right. But great guy, obviously fighting demons and just a lot of trouble in his life. But I just hope whatever he's going through right now, wherever he is, I just hope he comes out on the other side really good.
Yeah, and hopefully his nose is okay. I saw the last clip of him, and he was so good. He was really nice to me when he came through town, so I root for him too. Robin, everybody I ask about Robin, I'm always expecting something like, had her days, but most, like 5 guys, like I said, I've interviewed for this little series I'm doing, like, oh, no, Robin is the best. Robin Quivers, give me a fun Robin Quivers story and your thoughts on working with Robin.
I don't really have a fun Robin Quivers story. We just had like a working relationship, and we were friendly. She wasn't like my buddy, but I don't really have anything bad to say about Robin.
Was she okay with you showing her bra open? That was like the famous clip that became.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, I suppose so. I guess we reran that 1,000 times. Jeez, see, this is things I even forgot about. So that was where that was at Sirius already, right?
No, I believe it was.
No. That was it. That was at K-Rock. Now I remember. That was K-Rock.
Where did Robin Radzinski go? I think I Googled, and I'm like, where she used to be kind of the executive producer, I think. You had Eisinger, you had Radzinski. What happened to Robin? Do you talk to her?
Yeah, she went to work for I forgot what network. She went to work for a network down in Florida, a cable network, and then she ended up in California working for a production company. And now, believe it or not, she's in Hawaii.
Good for her.
And she's out of the business.
Smart woman. So yeah. I am basically out of the business besides the podcast. Stuttering John was on. Did you go on shoots with him at this during the 90s? Because he was still doing his Stuttering John bit. Was that part of what you were doing? And tell me if you have any fun.
I was John's main producer, so I took him out probably for 90% of his interviews. Shortly after the E! Show started, and we sort of became synonymous with John's going out, Doug's going with him. Those were amazing. I mean, that was, talk about kamikaze, talk about crazy, talk about like adrenaline rushes. Those were the days we went out before this whole, before there was these security measures that are in place that sort of halted what we were able to do. But those were fun shoots. They were crazy. John was fearless. He was relentless. He was a kamikaze. He wouldn't stop at anything until he got the interview. And there wasn't really crazy concerns about getting arrested or getting stopped at security lines, because a lot of these events we went to, there was so little security that's how we got it. Obviously, times have changed so substantially now, you couldn't even do it at, 1 iota close to what we did. But yeah, those were fun days.
Again, what I loved about the Stern Show was that after some of these interviews, he would talk to Jackie about, well, here's some of the questions we were going to ask before the celebrity left. And I just imagine these meetings with Howard and Jackie and Fred and just having them talk. Well, let's ask Tommy Lasorda if he ever farted in the catcher's face. It's like, who thinks of these questions? And John's like, I'm going to ask. And then did you have a fart in the catcher's face?
Yeah. That's fun. There were writers' meetings. So, and pretty much the whole staff can contribute. When there was an interview that was lined up, they would just send out a note and say, anyone want to contribute questions, you write questions. So, tons of people wrote questions, and then Howard would narrow them down into the top 10 or 15. And then John would go out with his list, and the rest is history. We usually got to 1 or 2 questions if we were lucky.
That's hilarious. So tell me the minutia of that, just the writers' meetings. You said that everyone was, how many people, I guess a mass email goes out, and then, what is it, Thursdays, I think they had the meetings or something like that. But did you actively go to these? Because it is kind of, you want to know what Howard's thinking, because you want to produce ahead in your head, hey, well, let's get that prop. Let's send John out, or let's send a camera, right?
Yeah. The staff meetings evolved where it was, I don't remember exactly when, but they evolved into big meetings with everyone. It was still during the K-Rock days, so it probably, I don't know exactly the time frame, but they were, when I started there, it was just like small meetings with the radio team, and then they evolved into bigger groups. Then it was the TV group, and the TV team was in the meetings, and everyone from the radio show, the interns were always in the meetings. It was the creative meetings. And everyone and anyone was able to speak and pitch and discuss ideas, and then you sort of developed ideas in these meetings, and some of them were just crazy and insane, and some were about guests. It was just, a real fun creative process.
So how did it end? Because now I know Sirius is still putting out some of these clips, so I'm assuming Sirius kind of just took over the whole production company, but how did it end for you? I think the whole on-demand thing just kind of ended, right? And then how did you not end up staying there? What happened at the end there?
It's a good question. It's a real good question. And that, really pissed off a lot of people, and a lot of people are really still scratching their heads. But the contract ended at In Demand, which we sort of knew was coming. And then just the way it actually was informed to us was little disheartening, a little confusing, a little surprising. It sort of happened on the air, where it was sort of a mistake made, where the announcement was made on the air before the staff actually knew. Sort of a misstep there. And without getting into the minutia, there was...
Or was it?
Someone screwed that up.
Or was it?
Someone screwed that up.
Yeah.
It was a miscommunication was the excuse. But that was strange. And then it just sort of ended, and it was strange. It was a weird way to end after such a long time with so many people that were so committed and loyal and dedicated to the show. Whatever. You just move on.
I have just a couple.
True colors came out, but I don't really know what happened. It's sort of, people are just sort of scratching their heads still to this day.
Well, we'll continue to scratch our heads. I think I know where you're talking about, but I have a couple more minutes with you. I appreciate this time that we've had to have our conversation that we're having. Do you have favorite moments? Like, do you have favorite show moments? When people, I know this is such a cliche question, but what 2-3 things come to mind when you think of your time, the 19 years that you spent there?
Oh my God. I got to tell you, like, one of the hardest, it's sort of, I don't know if I could narrow it down to like 1 or 2 instances. I just love when Beetlejuice came on the show, and Beetlejuice interacting with anyone, Beetlejuice in his costumes, Beetlejuice just in a straight up interview, Beetlejuice pitching something. Just, he was so funny and so unique and so authentic, and not even knowing why he was funny, or, just, I like the Whack Pack, some of those real crazy segments that we did, not just the Whack Pack being interviewed, but then coming like High Pitch Eric with the fish was just such a classic segment, and so funny and so real and so hysterical. Celebrity interviews were good, people that were not the average guests that you'd see on other shows that people would come on for the first time. Remember, we did a remote show in LA, and he interviewed Ronnie King, and I found that fascinating. I just thought that was a real interesting, such a unique guest and such a historical figure. That's something that I was like, wow, that's pretty amazing to be interviewing him and just hearing him in different perspective than what you're used to being interviewed by Howard. God, there's just so many. There's so many. The bands I used to love because it was so intimate and so awesome. You have like Lady Gaga or Metallica or Train. Just these amazing interviews and performances. It was just just the stuff that really was intimate, and you'd see people out of their usual context once they relaxed. And then obviously some of the funny bits with the whack pack were the standouts. That was really the fun moments.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned all those, and then I'm like, what a base of content this guy has created. I mean, it really is amazing. I will say it, I was a super fan from around 98 till about 2009, and I listened every day, and I just love the show. But I will share a couple of my favorites and then get your thoughts. The Gary tape, the things that happen where someone would just call and start this thing that became a show for a day. And the Gary tape is, if of course everyone has to know, Gary had this tape back in 1989 where he tries to get back his girlfriend, and it is just so sad and so hilarious. And it's one of those days where, you know how people, it's such cliche, I couldn't leave my car. I literally had to be at work at 9 a.m. and I couldn't get out of my car. Do you remember seeing that tape for the first time and going, oh my God, I can't believe, because Gary got like 30 grand for it or something crazy. So he had to get the money, but it just started with a guy calling in and saying, Gary made a tape, and then boom, the next day there's popcorn, there's two shows.
It was great. And again, the more Gary defended that, the more it just became bigger and bigger and bigger. It was great. It's just, that's like the real, pure, organic, authentic, raw nerve, raw emotion, discomfortable, uncomfortable segments. It was great for everyone else except Gary, but he was a good sport with that. I don't know if it was worth $30,000 at the end of the day, because here it is, 25 years later, and you're still talking about it.
Well, and there's a guy that I watch MLB Network every morning. This guy, Robert Flores, annoying. He says annoying. I mean, and I tell my wife my personal life said annoying, my professional life. I mean, I quote it. It's just, I know it by heart. I've seen it so many times. It's hilarious. I have to ask you about Gary because he's a fellow producer. I mean, man, this guy has taken a licking, but he's going to end up retired with a nice big house. But tell me a little bit about Gary, working with him, and just, he takes so many lumps and he just keeps coming back. I mean, the pitch is another one of those where it literally went on for days. But tell me a little bit about your relationship with Gary.
It was a good working relationship. We got along fine, and he did his thing, and I basically did what he did on the TV side. He did on the radio side. Obviously, he produced the radio show, and I took what was produced on the radio show and enhanced it and made it the best visual for TV. So we had a decent working relationship, and we just made the bits work. So if they were going to do a game show, obviously on radio you just need chairs, and that's pretty much it. But once you add the TV component, we would just work and create the synergy and go through the ideas and then make sure what we had in mind was not over the top. But again, that became pretty autonomous too. They'd say, we're going to do the Newlywed Game or the Newly Weird Game, whatever we called it. And we would just, at some point, we just did what we have to do. And it was never really a problem. If anything, it only made the segments on radio better because it made them into real shows. The thing we always had to be careful of in the fine line is that we didn't want to overproduce and make it too visual to the point where we forgot that it's actually a radio show first. Because at the end of the day, people have to understand what they're listening to, not what they're watching, even though we were recording it for television and we're looking at it as a TV crew and producers. So that was the fine line. We always got to make sure we weren't going too over the top to the point where the visuals were going to interfere with what Howard needed to do on radio, if that makes sense.
It does. But his abuse is warranted most times, I would say, right?
The what?
His abuse of Howard's abuse of Baba Booey. I mean, it's been 30 years or so, but a lot of it is warranted, I would say. I'll just say it for myself.
Yeah, he's always the punching bag. A lot of times he just walked right into things that just, and Howard's going to smell the blood like a shark.
I appreciate your time, Doug. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add. It's called Here's the Pitch. I let people pitch. Are we moving to Hawaii with Robin Radzinski someday, or what's going on? Anything we missed?
That would be nice. That'd be nice. No, I don't really have a pitch. This was just a fun conversation. I told you, like, you hit it up, and the way you hit me up, I was just like, yeah, this sounds different. We'll give it a shot.
Well, I appreciate it, and I know the fans here appreciate Doug Goodstein joining me here on Here's the Pitch. Again, the sponsor is Masses Restaurants. They were excited. I told them Doug Goodstein's coming on. They said, the producer of In Demand, Howard TV, I can't wait to hear his story. So stlmasses.com is the website for the restaurant in St. Louis. 5 locations. Check them out, and that's going to do it for today's show. I thank you for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time.